Turn in. Welcome everyone tonight to the Alberta Youth Soccer League parent presentation, little webinar and information night for everyone. If you have access to the chat, if someone can give me either a thumbs up or we can hear you just in the chat, that would be amazing. Any sort of questions that you might have tonight, feel free to enter them into the chat, as we'll be monitoring that as the presentation goes on. And we'll be looking to address it through the chat. I'm just trying to continue to admit everyone. I can see loads of thumbs up and a yep, so clearly we are live. People can hear us, which is great. And on the line tonight, we have got Dave Nutt, who is from Canada Soccer. He's the manager of development operations. Himself, along with Jason DeVos, are really two people that are pushing the game forward within our country, raising standards across the board, and have been instrumental in developing the club licensing program and also the PDP guidelines for the country. He's been a massive resource for myself, for sure, in terms of guiding principles and reinforcing pieces within the AYSL and within club licensing. And we're really, really lucky to have him on the line here tonight, sharing some of the philosophy and really the background behind the player development program that is the AYSL within Alberta. We're also lucky to have Matt Thomas on the line tonight as well with Alberta Soccer. He's our manager of coach education, and really he's doing everything within ASA right now. I would more say acting technical director right now. He's a man of many, many trades, very well traveled across the world, as well as through Canada with numerous roles. Matt's been really great in terms of lending support to the AYSL and to this new league with the absence of John Clubb, who was initially tasked with helping to build it and implement it. So thank you, Matt, for joining us as well tonight. Really lucky to have you. And also on the line tonight is Carlo Bruno, who's the executive director at CMSA. He's new to Alberta and to Calgary. He's come from Winnipeg Youth Soccer Association, and he's already hit the ground running here over the last few months, meeting a lot of the clubs and getting his feet wet. He's got some great ideas, and we're really, really lucky to have him within Calgary. And then lastly, my name's Jordan Stewart. I work with Calgary Minor Soccer Association as their technical leader. I also help to run some of the AYSL operations and club support within that. So within some of the questions that you might have tonight and some of those logistical pieces, I'll be able to help answer some of those and provide some direction for that. So Dave, I hope that your mic is not muted, and I hope we're good to go. I'll keep admitting people to the chat, but as I say, if there's any questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll be more than happy to answer them either during the presentation or just afterwards. So thank you, and Dave, take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Jordan. Can you hear me okay? Good. Okay, perfect. Thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate it. And from the looks of things, a great turnout tonight. So really pleased to see that. And I'm a parent myself. I've just come from coaching my my little one. I say little one. She's not that little anymore, but I just came straight from an under 11 girls game. So excited to be here with you. And unfortunately for all of you, sometimes parents get a bad rap, and I'm a parent myself. And what I will say to you is, for me personally, I think parents are easy because we all want the same thing. We all want what's best for our kids. And when we don't feel like we're getting what's best for our kids, or we don't have the information that we need in order to be able to make the best decision we can for our children, I think that's when we start to get frustrated. So generally speaking, parents are easy because we know what you want. You want what's best for your children. And hopefully today is a starting point to be able to give you some resources to be able to have good conversations with the right information in order to make the decisions that you think are best for your children and for your family and for yourself. So that's the goal for today. Kind of broad overview of what we're going to try to cover off today. I'm going to start with a little bit of information about what the Canada Soccer Player Development Program is and interlinked with the AYSL. because some of you, this may be the first time you're hearing any of those acronyms. It may be the first time that you're experiencing this type of conversation. So we want to make sure you have the basics. From there, we want to tell you why it's important. Why are we moving in this direction nationally, and what's the purpose behind it? And then finally for you, which I hope is the part that you're going to find the most interesting, we're going to give you a lot of information. So we're going to try to summarize that with some take-home messages. And then I think the really important part is to equip you some good parent questions. So I know there were some questions that came through in the registration early on. A lot of them were logistical questions about, what's going to happen at the combine, what are the types of things that we're looking for in the players, when's the schedule coming out, all of those types of things. So Jordan and Matt will be able to take on a lot of those. If there are general questions, I'm happy to answer those as well from a philosophical perspective. And then I think the thing that I'd like to be able to send you away with are some questions you can ask the clubs that are at the combine or your club when you go back to your home environment to be able to make sure that you've got a good understanding of what's important in these programs and the types of things that we're trying to achieve through the PDP. So hopefully we'll be able to address those questions. And as Jordan said, if there's things that come up early on, then more than happy to be able to have those conversations and answer them as a part of the presentation. I don't really do formal, so I'll call it fairly informal in the conversation. So that's what we'll hope to cover today. And as a starting point, most important thing for you to understand is what is the PDP? So to start us off, I wanted to give you a little bit of context. So some of you may have heard of a PDP or an AYSL. The two really are used interchangeably, and some of the information that you've gotten about those programs might actually be accurate. So if it's not, I'm going to go through and dispel a few of the myths along the way and hopefully give you the right information for you to be able to take away. I think it's also important that you've got an understanding from a Canada Soccer perspective of why we're moving in this direction, because it is a change from what we've done in the past, and your children are the first generation of players in Alberta, not necessarily in the country, but in Alberta that have gone through this type of program. So it really is a different change from what you're used to. So as a starting point, the PDP is a network of standards-based leagues that span the country with a goal of providing the best possible developmental environment for young players. And we're going to come back later on in the presentation and really talk a little bit about what provide the best possible development environment for young players really means. Because I think that's a key piece to you, is understanding what the expectations are of these programs that you're entering into. But before we get there, the PDP is a network of leagues. So there's 4 standards-based leagues across the country. There's the BCSPL out in BC, which some of you may have played interlocking games against with your children or be aware of. That was the first standards-based league. It's now entering, if I'm not mistaken, year 11 of its existence. So that's when I say you're the first generation of players in Alberta going through this program, but not nationally. There is some experience in this base of organizations that have been doing this for quite some time. We've got the OPDL in Ontario, which would be the largest standards-based league. It's got 28 clubs currently that are participating, with a few more scheduled to start play this summer. And then the other new league that's starting out on the same timeline as the AYSL is the PLSJQ in Quebec, which is a new standards-based league in that environment as well. So between those 4 organizations, those 4 leagues, that comprises the Canada Soccer Player Development Program. So as a starting point, I think it's important that you know that being a part of the AYSL means you're not only a part of the provincial alignment, but you're also a part of something bigger. You're a part of a nationally driven program where all of these organizations are striving to be able to meet a similar set of standards. So why does that matter? Well, from a Canada Soccer perspective, it's an important differentiator for that program is where it sits in our player development stream or our player pathway. And that might not mean much to you today, but hopefully over time and through this explanation, you'll start to understand a little bit more what that means. So as a starting point, I wanted to share with you the graphical representation of our player pathway. So what this is, it's a reflection of the environments that currently exist in Canada. And when we say player pathway, we get this kind of impression that it's this beautifully manicured walkway that we can stroll along, and we'll start off as a little 6-year-old and we'll end up playing for the national team. I can tell you, and some of you may know people, some of you may have been in that environment yourself, it's rarely linear. It's rarely a situation where you go go A to B to C to D, and all of a sudden I'm playing for the national team. Most of the time you've got fits and starts, you've got different environments you experience along the way, and different things that you're a part of in that journey. And from my experience anyway, there's no two journeys that are the same. But the pathway really is a depiction of where all of our environments sit. It's got 3 bands, which are the pieces that kind of go across horizontally. We've got a grassroots stream, which is soccer up to the age of 12. We use a FIFA definition for what we call grassroots. Some of you who may have come from Europe, for example, UEFA have a different definition of grassroots. Because we're FIFA members, we use the FIFA definition. So everything up to the age of 12 is considered grassroots. And within that environment, it's all about engaging players, getting them active, getting them to fall in love with the game. There's no such thing as high performance soccer when we're talking about those ages. It's about providing opportunity to as many players as we possibly can. And as you're a little bit older, we won't spend too much time in this space, but if any of you have younger children that are moving through the system as well, you may experience something called a skill center or a dedicated player program, which is designed to do just that, provide a really good developmental environment for players up to the age of 12, because we honestly believe that if we give kids opportunity, we provide them with good structure, good programming, and good coaching, we're going to have more better players that love the game in order to populate the streams as we move forward. So as we start to move up in age, then we start to see players select different streams that they would like to participate in, or move towards different environments based on their ability and their competency as we get a little bit older. So when we talk about our community stream, that's out on, I guess I'm looking at it be my left-hand side, so I assume it would be the same for you. Really what that is a Soccer for Life program. So that's about friends, fitness, all of the soft pieces that are a part of what you do. Soccer for fun. So we're enjoying the participation. I'm an old guy. I still go out and kick around on a Thursday night with a group of guys my age, and we have a great time. So I would be sitting out there in that Soccer for Life community program. I may, on the day, consider myself to be a high-performance athlete, but the reality is I've been told, unfortunately, John Herdman's not going to be knocking on my door anytime soon to give me an opportunity to go to Qatar. So I sit out there on that left-hand side. Beside that, we've got our competitive stream, which is the more competitive players in Calgary. I would say that would be your tier 1 and some of your tier 2 programming. So the groups that are going to provincial championships, that are traveling maybe a little bit more, competing for provincial championships, they're going to the existing club nationals program, that would sit within our competitive stream. So it's a little bit more within that stream, less about fun, fitness, and friends, and a little bit more about the competition side of it, testing ourselves against others of similar ability, and providing a little bit more commitment to the game in order to be able to provide success on the field. So those are the competitive stream. Where the PDP programs fit is over here in this space. So that's the development performance stream. And the development side of it is for youth, because that's the primary focus of programs within this space. It's about development, because we're trying to provide young players through their formative years the opportunity to get better, the opportunity to improve, the opportunity to have different experiences and to be able to move the game forward in that way. As they get a little bit older and we start to move into colleges and universities, semi-professional environments, if those exist, those become our performance leagues, where the result is the thing that matters. So that's what differentiates what a PDP program is versus a Soccer for Life program, is where it sits in that pathway. And then out on the furthest right-hand side, we've got our excellence stream, which are kind of our provincially and nationally driven environments, professional soccer. So in Calgary, you've got Whitecaps programming, you've got a Rex program that sits in that space out towards the right. So that's really what the differentiator is from what a PDP environment looks like from a pathway perspective compared to what it looks like from a competitive environment or some of the things that you might be used to already. So because of the associated standards within those PDP environments, that's why we're able to recognize them differently within the pathway. And we classify that from a Canada Soccer perspective as the highest level of youth soccer in the country. So those 4 leagues that meet standards, that have coaches that meet standards, that have programs that meet standards, that leads to their ability to be recognized as providing the highest level of youth soccer in the country. So that's what the PDP is. Probably more important to all of you is, why do we need it? Why does it matter? And one of the reasons is traditionally the youth soccer system in Canada has put an overemphasis on competition. And unfortunately, when we put that emphasis on competition and result, what it does is limit the ability to focus on developing individual players and preparing them for success. And I use this analogy a lot, but imagine if in the school system, the biggest concern that we had with our children is what classroom had the highest test score. And that was the only thing that mattered. We didn't worry about teaching them to read and write and do math as a collective. All we worried about is how we scored on standardized tests. I think we'd be failing our kids. And we need to treat soccer a lot more like we do a school and a lot less like the professional game that we see on TV, because our focus needs to be on developing players and equipping them with the skills that they need to be successful in the game. And there's a great article out there. It's called "Competition is a Good Servant but a Poor Master." And it was written by the Sport for Life Society, who some of you may know. They're the group behind long-term athlete development, long-term player development. They still exist today, and they do a lot of good work around sport for development and how to support people to have positive sporting experiences. It's a really powerful article. And the thing that I like about it is how it frames competition. So competition is important. Let's not pretend that it's not. It's why we play sport. It's what differentiates sport from game or leisure activity or some of these other things. So the competition is an important part. Where we start to have problems is when competition becomes and result becomes the priority ahead of development. Because what that means is we can't focus on the development process because our focus is on the result. And we skip the development piece in order to pursue the result. So put a different way, Chris Ramsey, who is a really highly respected man in the game, he at the time was a technical director for Queen's Park Rangers and oversaw their academy. What he said is when you're with the first team, so the professional environment, you have to win. And if you play terribly and still win, people will forgive you. So think about it if you're a fan of Manchester United or Liverpool or Manchester City or Bayern Munich. You could have a poor performance on a Saturday, but if you come away with a win, you're happy. But in development, which is youth programming, the performance is for the player. So it's about how the player plays on the day, and the result is for the coach. And what Mr. Ramsey says is, if I want to win more than I want to develop the players, we might win the league, because in youth soccer, there's a lot of shortcuts we can take to be able to find results, because we can manipulate that with how we play the game. So we might win the league, but eventually, because we're not focused on developing the individual players, those players won't make the grade. And when he says won't make the grade, what he means is he won't prepare them for the first team. And yes, the competition is important, and how we play on the day and being able to compete is key. But for someone like Chris Ramsey at the top levels, his role as an academy director is to develop players to move on to the first team. And within our environments, our job is to develop players so that they can have long-term success, whether that be university and college opportunities, whether that be professional soccer opportunities, national team opportunities, or whether that just be to give them the skills and the confidence and the competence to be able to continue to play as senior players like I am, still out kicking around and using it to stay fit and stay social. So that really is our goal. And I'll give you an example of why that adult competition model can be problematic and can limit our development opportunities. So if our measure of success in youth sport is how many games we win, what that does is it actually discourages individual player development rather than encouraging. Because to win games in youth sport, the easiest way to do that is to pick the biggest, strongest, fastest players. It means to limit the amount of opportunity other players might have, because I need to have my best players on the field as often as we can so that we can get those results. What it might also mean is, instead of developing the late developer, the kid who maybe has big potential but isn't going to get those opportunities, I might start to look in my neighbor's backyard and see if they have any good players that might help me win, versus focusing on my own. And I end up collecting a group of early developers that are advanced compared to their peers in that moment, rather than developing players to be able to progress and move on to play. So as much as we might think the teams that are winning games are the ones that are developing the best players, that's only true if they're putting the work into developing players, because winning games can happen in all kinds of different ways within youth soccer. I don't know, Jordan, were you waving there to ask a question or just saying hi?
No, Dave, I was just saying that your audio cut out there for a second. I was going, pointing in the ear a little bit, but I can hear you again.
Sorry. Okay, good. So even though it may seem counterintuitive, this idea that focusing on results helps us to develop players, it's actually the opposite. It's a limiter to the development because the things that we need to do to win games may not necessarily be the things that we need to do to equip our players to have success long term. So that's from Chris Ramsey and my kind of long-winded interpretation of what he's trying to say there. So again, for players to develop their potential to the fullest extent, they need to be in an environment that caters to their individual development needs. And that's a key piece too, is their individual developmental needs. Not for the good of the team, not for the good of the club, but for the good of the individual. And here's why. Despite what some of you may have been led to believe, teams don't learn. Individuals within teams learn. And as much as results on the field can be a source of pride and something that we're really excited about, at the end of the day, teams aren't selected to play from Canada. Teams don't become professionals. Teams don't earn college and university scholarships. That's about the individual player. And if we aren't in an environment where we're developing the individual, we're not going to equip people with the skills to be able to succeed at those higher levels of play. And beyond that, leagues don't develop players. Leagues are a competition outlet, and competition is a key piece of the developmental process. But what's more important is what happens every day of the week in order to prepare us to be able to compete. So think about it again like school. So the test or the exam, that's a part of the process for sure. But it's not the only thing that we focus on. What's way more important than that is the things that go on every day in our classrooms to prepare us to be able to do well on that exam. So what we need to ask as parents is those important questions, because when we go to school, our first question isn't what's the quality of the exam or what's the testing criteria like within this environment. It's how is my classroom managed? What's the quality of my teacher? In our case, the coach. So who's going to be teaching my child? What are they like? What do they believe in from a coaching perspective? What resources and supports are available to school? So do we have a resource room? Do we have good technology supports? Do we have a great physical education space that we can use in that environment? Similarly, what are the resources and the supports that are available at my club that can help my child to have a really positive experience? And then the other pieces that make sense and need to be talked about is what's the quality of the administration? And I know you've all got kids because you're here. So that's one of the key things when you're picking your schools is what's the administration like, the vice principal, the principal, what are they like to deal with? And do they provide a good environment? What's your club leadership like? Because they're the ones that have the back of the coach and are setting the environment for all of the teams to be a part of. And then finally, you're going to want to think about some of the logistical things. And the same with a school. Is it close? You know, when does the bell ring? Does the lunch hour work for me? In my soccer program, what's the cost? Where's the location? Is it close to my house? Is it far away? What does the schedule look like? Is it a Tuesday night instead of a Thursday? Those things matter. So start to think about some of those questions when you start to prepare to select your program ahead of where do we think the team is going to finish, because that's really key to me. It's about that individual development process and finding the right people and the right supports to put around your children so that they can grow and learn and be successful. So hopefully that's a starting point for us to think about why it's important. The other thing that really is important for us to remember is it's about creating the right environment. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on what that means later on in the presentation. But I think at this point, it's also really important to talk about what standard-based leagues are meant to be versus what maybe they're perceived to be. So we hear this term all the time about, well, it's got to be best with best. And when I hear best with best, what I look at is the best environment, the organizations that can provide the best environments competing alongside other like-minded environments for the betterment of players. It's not with best as in we're going to pick the best 10 players, because when we do that, first of all, who gets to decide who's best? And who gets to decide how many bests there are? Are there only 20 bests? Are there 500 bests? Are there 1,000 bests? Is there only one best? Because ultimately, where you draw that line is always going to impact opportunity. Well, what we want to do is create the right environment for players to develop. And we want to provide that environment to as many players as we possibly can, because we want them to be able to achieve their expectations. And the other piece that's really important is what best looks like for a youth player is not necessarily what best looks like when we reach our national team level. And I'll give you a couple of examples that I think are relevant. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have probably been watching our women's program, Olympic gold medalists, and our men's program, on the verge of qualifying for a World Cup. I still can't figure out how they're not there now, but I believe they will be very shortly here. And we look at a couple of players within those environments. So Vanessa Gio, who was the one of the center backs for the women's national team, she never played for a Canadian youth national team. She didn't make her debut for the full Canadian national team until she was 23 years old. And now she's a key starter, one of the best 11 players in that environment, and an Olympic gold medalist. So it wasn't the early selection piece. What she looked like at a 15-year-old didn't have the profile of what someone that Olympic gold medalist would have. Otherwise, she would have been in those national youth club teams. But she found that way. She found her way to that environment. And another great example, Aleister Johnston, who, for those that are following, has been such a key player and such a revelation for our men's national team. He went to one identification camp when he was an under 16 player for a national team, wasn't selected, never played for a youth national team, was playing League One Ontario, which is a semi-professional men's league in Ontario, for 4 years while he was going to college, drafted into MLS, made his debut for the national team in 2021 at 22 years of age, having never played in that environment before. And we look at him now, he's made a big move to Montreal to come back home to be able to play in Canada for an MLS team. And I think this is just the start of the journey for him. But these are players that found that pathway and got to that environment because they found good environments to support their development along the way. It wasn't because they won a lot of games early on. And I can guarantee you, I've worked in the professional world, I've worked with national teams, and I've never heard a national team coach ask how many provincial championships did that player win when they were talking about whether to select them. So it's important to compete. It's important that we give our best on the field. And yeah, we all want that to include a result. But the game of soccer and the development process with young players is so much more than that. That adult competition model we need to move away from, and we need to make sure we're doing what's best to provide our kids with the opportunity to become Vanessa or to become Aleister and be able to move on and represent Canada because we've gotten the development along the way, not because we've taken shortcuts to be able to win those trophies and be able to put those up on the mantelpiece and use that as our determinant of success. So we believe that by improving the environment at the club level, the PDP will produce a consistent stream of talented players who can go on to achieve success in the game at higher levels of competition. And that's going to mean things for different things for different players. There are some players that are going to play for Canada. There's some players that will go on to have great professional careers that may never make it at the international level. There's going to be players like myself that played at a university level, had a great career at that level, but my athletic potential, that was the ceiling. That was as much as I was going to achieve because I wasn't a good enough player to move on to other levels. And there's others that won't play at that level, but they'll continue to play the game at an adult level over a period of time. They'll become coaches, they'll become referees, they'll become administrators, and they'll be our next generation of people that are driving the game forward. So all of those things can be successes and can be seen as an achievement, and that needs to be our focus. So to put it another way, what we really want is as many as possible for as long as possible in the best environment possible. And we'll spend a little bit of time now talking about what the best environment possible means. Because it's easy to say, yeah, we want the best environment, but talking about what that actually means, I think helps inform all of you as parents in terms of the right conversations to be able to have with your clubs so you can make good choices for your children, which is ultimately what you want, what's best for my child. So for us within PDP and programming and within these environments, what we mean by the best environment possible is a few things. First thing is we want to increase the quality and the volume of training. So our PDP programs will train at least 3 times a week and they'll go year round. The coaches within that program will all hold the Canada Soccer Youth License, which is a new workshop that's just come out in the last couple of years and focuses on not only the X's and O's in coaching, the technical tactical component, but it helps these coaches to understand the developmental process that children go through their teenage years. And you're all parents of teenagers, and you know it's a different world when you're talking about dealing with teenagers. So understanding that and being able to relate to that can be just as important as understanding the X's and O's of how to coach. And we do a great exercise as a part of some of our workshops. And I'll encourage you to give some thought to this just as I'm talking here is think about who your best coach was. And if you haven't played sports, if you haven't been involved in that environment, think about who your best teacher was. And then think a little bit about why that was your best teacher. And what we find almost down to a T when we talk to coaches in these environments is their best coaches, their best teachers, they do things like inspire me, believe in me, help me to see my potential, help me to overcome my fears, be a support when I needed it, push me to become all I can be. It's all of these things. It's very rare that we hear someone say, you know what, best coach I ever had because, man, were they good in the 4-4-2. I understand completely what my role was as a left-sided midfielder. It's about building those relationships and building those connections. But up until recently, we haven't focused on that within our coaching environments because it's been about how do we create the best on-field game model that we possibly can. And we're moving away from that and equipping these coaches with the newest coaching methodology and pedagogy so that they can relate to your children and they can create really good environments that support them mentally, socially, emotionally, physically, as well as technically and tactically. So you get that well-rounded, holistic approach. And that's what we mean by creating a best environment. It also means that we create periodized program with the developmental needs of the players coming first. We know children through their teenage years, they're growing. Their joints are changing, their bodies are changing, and they are susceptible at times to injuries. They are susceptible to overload injuries or overtraining injuries. If we play sport or we play soccer 8 days a week, players at that age are going to break down. If we don't have rest periods where we can take a breather and get away from the game and do something different and just be kids, we're going to fall out of love with the game. So what's meant to happen within the PDP program is it's not meant to be a program that's supplemented by 3 other programs and tournaments and travel teams and all of these other things. It's meant to be the program that your children play in so that they're getting the right training and the right approach to be able to support their developmental needs, keep them safe, keep them engaged, and keep them appropriately supported throughout their developmental journey. We also want to do our very best to provide more meaningful competition for players because that's how we get better. And when we remove the constraints of that adult competition model where we say, hey, the only way a league can run is if you play everybody home and away and you decide how many teams has the most points, and that's the champion, and that must be the best team, and they must be the best players. When we remove that and we focus on our goal being to provide the appropriate challenge week in and week out for players, that's how we develop. We don't develop winning by 5 goals, losing by 5 goals, trying to destroy our opponent by smashing as many goals past them as we possibly can. How we develop is by fitting into this area called the challenge zone. So when we're not challenged enough, we don't develop because we either get bored or we get into bad habits because we can get away with things that we won't be able to get away with at higher levels of play. When we're too challenged, we give up because we know we don't have a chance. So what we want to do is create meaningful competition where results are close and competitive, because that's the best way for us to use competition as a servant for development, not a master, not the thing that we're there to do, but to help us in that developmental journey. The next thing we want to do is increase the caliber of coaching and the access to and frequency of coach education opportunities. So as I said earlier, all of our coaches within the PDP programming will have the youth license. They also go through a number of other trainings about safe sport, about building positive relationships with children, about creating environments that are free of bullying, harassment, and abuse and neglect. And then our PDP organizations, so the clubs that participate at this level, they're also responsible for providing support and regular developmental opportunities for their coaches at the club level. So the coaches are supported by their organizations to improve in the same way we want to support our players to improve, because more better coaches mean more better teams, more better environments, which will lead us to have more better players. The same thing that we look for in the education system. If we were struggling with the number of quality students that we had in Canada, the answer wouldn't be to have a couple of really good schools and filter all of the smart kids into those schools so that we can help them to get better and ignore everything else. What we would do is have a referendum on education, and we would go, hey, we need more better teachers, creating more better classrooms so that we can have more better students. But in soccer, we can fall into this trap where we go, well, there's only X number of good players, so that's all the good environments we should have and all the good coaches we should have. Well, what about everybody else? Don't they deserve an opportunity to get better? Don't they deserve an opportunity to have a quality coach in order to be able to grow that pool of players? So what we're looking at is the future, not the present. So we want to create environments that can allow players to develop and move forward and meet their potential. The other thing that you'll see with these environments is they all have sports science and medicine support. So they have experts in areas like nutrition, mental skills training, physical training. They have partnerships with sports medicine clinics where if there's an injury, your child is going to be supported and returned to play in the most responsible way they possibly can. So in short, we're going to try to put a bubble around the players in the best way we possibly can, like a professional club would, recognizing the constraints that we have in amateur youth soccer. So you can expect to have support around social emotional training, mental training, nutrition, physical training, all of these areas that will help you to become a great player on the field or help your children to become great players on the field. We also provide technology support. So matches are recorded, they're analyzed, and more importantly, those things are used to be able to help us support player and coach development. So in 2022, the use of technology to help us to improve what we're doing on the field, especially for young players, oftentimes, and I coach at this ages, so I can speak from experience, the players don't have the capacity to be able to look outside and see the game while they're in it. So you can see it maybe as a coach or as a parent and go, hey, so-and-so is really not in the right position in that environment. Or when the ball goes here, maybe that's a run that could happen. But until they see it on TV and they see what that looks like, they maybe can't develop the learning in that way. So we want to be able to create an environment where we can use technology as a tool to support player development. So for me, that's really what best environment means is do we have all of these tools around the players so that they can develop holistically across all of the areas that are going to help them be successful. So ideally, we create that environment for as many players as we possibly can, because then we'll be able to develop more good players. So those are the types of things to think about when you look at what's the right fit for my son or my daughter as we move into these environments. So I've thrown a lot at you there. I'm going to try now to take a step back and send you home with some take-home messages. And there's probably some questions that I'm more than happy to answer. But I'll also send you away with some questions that you might be able to ask of your club or of those clubs if you're going to the combine that might be able to give you a little bit more clarity around what those good environments look like. So as human beings, we tend to go to people that we trust and believe have expertise to help us make important decisions. So if I'm in trouble with the law, I'm going to go to a lawyer for some advice. If I've got a medical issue, I'm going to go to a doctor. So we go to people that have expertise in order to provide us with advice and people that we trust. Unfortunately, in the soccer world, sometimes those people that we believe have expertise and trust may guide us towards what benefits them the most. So the way we overcome that is by asking good questions. So hopefully you've got some already in the back of your mind. I'll send you away with a few more. So starting point, remember when we talk about what best with best means, it speaks to the environment. So when you go to your club, I would encourage you to ask about things like what supports are in place for my child. So what does the environment look like? Is there sports science support? How do you use technology? Who's the coach? What does the club believe in from a development perspective? If the pitch from a prospective club starts with how good the team will be and what our chances are to win the championship and how much your son or daughter can help us, be cautious. It's not to say it's not a good environment, but remember, team success is not the same thing as focusing on individual player development as we talked about earlier. So if that's the pitch, dig a little bit deeper. Ask some more questions to find out what it is that they stand for and how they're going to help your individual son or daughter become better. Some philosophical questions that you might want to take away. So how does the club develop players? What are the processes? They should be able to answer that. They should tell you what coaches are responsible for in the player development pathway and what you can expect. What feedback can you expect from the club along the way? Is it an organization where you show up on the first day and you never hear anything until the last day of the season when you're told, well, maybe next year isn't the right environment for you? Or is it an organization that along the way is providing you with meaningful feedback that will help you to be able to support your child at home in the same way they're supporting them on the field? Things like, what does a typical training session look like? So what can I expect when I show up to my 60-minute or my 90-minute or my 2-hour session? What's it going to look like on the field? How does your team like to play? And then the follow-up question to that, why? Why do you play that way? Is it because it presents great opportunities for our players to develop, or is it because you believe it's maybe the best way that we can get results in the short term? So why do you play that way? And don't be afraid to ask these questions, because clubs at the National Youth Club license level which participate in the PDP, they should be equipped to answer them, because that's the process that they've gone through to reach this stage. Some other things that you might want to think about. What does the periodized plan look like? So how are you going to make sure that the rest periods are there for my child to get a break from the game and refresh? Because remember, your children are still 14 and 15 years old. They have a lot of interests that don't involve being at soccer 365 days a year, and that's okay. That balance is the thing that allows you to fall in love with the game, stay in love with the game, while continuing to be a child. So what does that look like at your club? How do we make sure that those players are able to have that positive experience? Maybe ask about what the sports science and medicine supports look like. Who do you work with? And what's their background? How does the club use technology to support player development? So it's great that you're going to record games and you're going to help me, make a highlight video that maybe I can share with college and university coaches. That's a part of it for sure. But it's bigger than that. It's about using that as a tool to be able to move things forward. And then finally, from a big picture perspective, success for me, from a PDP club licensing program, it's about long-term sustainable system change. It's about leaving things better than what they are today. And remember when I spoke to you about some of the challenges of using standings and results of measures of success? For me, we need to replace that with new measures that better reflect what sports should be. So as a club, are we improving player attraction? Are we getting more kids playing soccer? When they're playing soccer, are we keeping them engaged for longer? Once they're in our environments, are we progressing them? So are we able to develop players to move on to better environments and move the game forward and move their own experience forward by playing at higher levels of play? Or are we looking for players from other environments to supplement the programs that we've developed? And finally, is there a thought on transition planning? So are there opportunities for your children to learn about coaching, to learn about refereeing, to learn about administration or some of the other areas that you might be able to benefit from in sport participation? Because if we do those things well, if we improve the number of players coming into the game, how long they play the game, the number of players that are moving on to higher levels of play, and then create pathways for those players that don't continue to play the game to be able to transition into other meaningful roles, I think that's a much better measure of success than how many games we won as a 14-year-old. And then the final piece to the puzzle is we want organizations that align to the principles of the club licensing program. So you can ask them, how do you feel about the principles and how do these things get implemented within your club? And for those that haven't seen it before, the principles that we believe in at Canada Soccer, and I know CMSA and Alberta Soccer are huge proponents and supporters of, and the clubs that are in this environment have made commitments to doing these things well as well, are, do we prioritize fun? Yes, it's a serious endeavor when we're on the field and we want players to strive to be their best. But at the end of the day, we play sports because it's fun. We stop playing sports when it's no longer fun. And that's even at the professional level, even at the national team level. Yeah, it's hard work. Yeah, it's competition, but they enjoy it. Do we emphasize physical, mental, and emotional safety? So do we make sure the environments that we create for young players are safe? As parents, that's foundational. We care about the safety of our children more than anything else in the world. So are we making sure that the environments we're putting them in reflect that and that they're safe? And what we mean by safe isn't just they don't practice on fields with potholes where, I might fall and break my leg, but it's an environment that's free of bullying and harassment. It's an area where I can express myself, where I feel welcome, where I feel a sense of belonging, regardless of my background, regardless of where I come from and the lived experiences that I have. Are we providing developmentally appropriate, high quality programs? So that are we creating those best environments? Are we maximizing attraction, holistic personal development, progression, and long-term engagement? So those measures that we think are better ones than the number of games that you win on the field. Are we focused on participant-centered decision making? So are the decisions that we make as grown-ups in the best interest of the players as individuals? Or are they in the best interest of me and the coach because it's going to help me win more games, or me as a club because I'm going to be the champion of this competition and then everyone's going to think I'm a wonderful club? Well, what if that's not what's best for the individual player? What if what's best for the individual player is to move on to another environment that might better support their developmental journey? Is that where our decision making comes from? Are we fostering accessible, inclusive, and welcoming environments so that people feel like they're part of something bigger than just a soccer team? I know for me personally, that's a big part of my journey. Some of the people that are my best friends in the world today are people I played youth soccer with. And my coaches that I worked with, I was fortunate, not all the time, but most of the time, to be able to get coaches that believed in that and wanted to create good human beings. Is that something that's a focus? Do we act as a good corporate and community citizen? So do we play nice in the sandbox? At the end of the day, we need each other to have a competition. If there was only one team, we don't have a league. We've got no one to play against. We've got nobody to compete with, and then we're not going to be able to develop. And are we a good community citizen? Are we seen as something that's bigger than just a soccer provider? Do we contribute to the greater good? And especially right now on the heels of COVID, or in the midst of COVID, still unfortunately, are we seen as something that's doing more for the fabric of our society than just running a soccer program? And I think if we do those things well and we provide those really good environments, we're going to be successful. So ask those questions. Ask those questions of your clubs, ask those questions of your coaches, because as parents, we know what you want. You want what's best for your kids, but you don't always have the tools to be able to understand what best means and the questions to be able to ask in order to make sure that that's done well. So that's me. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your attention. Hopefully you took something from this. I always find these presentations challenging when I can't see faces, because I feel like I'm just speaking kind of into the abyss here, and I have no idea whether people are nodding and going, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, or whether they're doing the opposite with some of the gestures behind the screens there. But hopefully it gave you a little bit of information to take away anyway. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have that kind of pertain to the more kind of philosophical high-end stuff. And certainly Matt and or Jordan will be able to take on some of the questions that are more logistical about the actual league operations. And there may be some as well, I don't want to speak for you, Jordan and Matt, that are more kind of driven by the club. How much does it cost, or what day do we practice on? Those things would be more club side. So I'm going to stop talking, have a sip of water, and happy to answer any questions. And I'll just, Jordan, you want me to stop sharing the screen? Is that better, or does it matter?
No, I think you could probably leave it up. It's probably a nicer image for people to see than my big ugly mug when I speak. So yeah, let's just leave that up for a minute.
Good.
Thanks, Dave, for all of that information and the philosophy behind how this was developed and where it's leading the nation, really, in terms of a standard that's being set and priorities within youth development and club development in the game. So thank you. The questions are starting to roll in. And I guess started off like for both you and Matt as a general question here, in terms of you had mentioned that the PDP really is like the program, right? The travel tournaments, the extra this, the extra that really aren't a part of this program. Can you elaborate a little bit more in terms of like, I'm a goalkeeper, right? I like to do goalkeeper specific training. Would the expectation be that that is involved within these licensed environments and standards-based environments, or would I still have to go and seek that from a private provider outside of the club?
Yeah, two I guess components to that. The first being all of the licensed clubs need to have a goalkeeper coach who will have by 2023 gone through the youth licensed goalkeeping workshop and providing that environment. So there should be that opportunity within your club, which would then allow you to be able to have it fit well within the rest of your training schedule. The other piece, and I'm not a goalkeeper, so I don't know as much about this as some of the others that will, but from conversations with those who are and have been goalkeeper coaches, one of the other key pieces of goalkeeper is you're a part of the team as well. So pulling the goalkeeper out and not having them a part of team training, you lose that opportunity to be able to work as a unit, because ultimately the goalkeeper is a part of your 11. So you may need additional training that your club's providing within that environment, and recognizing the technical elements of goalkeeping. There's going to need to be a goalkeeper coach that provides that support, but you also want them working in within the team environment as well. So you should be able to get that within your club. So I would encourage you, if you do have a son or daughter who's a goalkeeper, to ask those questions. Who is the goalkeeper coach, and how can I expect the kind of individualized training that a goalkeeper might need, and B, how that fits into the bigger picture. And that's not dissimilar to any other position. There's specific training maybe that a fullback might need or a center forward might need that's different from what a holding midfielder might need. So everybody's got those position-specific training that they're going to need to experience over time because the roles are different. But we also want to see that integrated into a team environment as well. So that should be provided within the club, and I would encourage you to have that conversation about who those individuals are and how it fits into the bigger training picture.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. And then I guess, Matt, to try and build on that in terms of that periodized schedule over a calendar year and what that entails. I mean, we're working really hard right now to get the schedule completed for this outdoor competitive season right now. To make sure that players aren't playing back-to-back games on a weekend, to make sure that there's adequate rest and recovery in between games, and there's no more than 4 games in 15 days, and certain standards around that. Can you elaborate a little bit more, I guess, on the tournament aspect of it as well, and when that's given a green light, when it's not part of this program, and kind of what the parameters are around that as well, Matt? Would you be able to provide some insight there?
Yeah, no problem. And Dave, do you want to speak to it first, and then I'll jump in after you, because since it was a conversation we had recently, or do you want me to just jump straight into it?
You go ahead, Matt, because I don't know the specifics of what that looks like in Alberta. So if you wanted to start, and I can jump in if there's anything that I can add.
Yeah, so and you just mentioned it, Jordan, and this is for everyone. It's a standards-based league, so there's looking after the players and creating the best environments during play. And there's the best environments and looking to create and look after players off the field as well. So when we, there's periodization breaks that are put in, they're not put in so you can, players or teams or organizations can fly off somewhere to go and compete somewhere else. They're put in so you, as a child, as an athlete, gets the preparation to rest, to be a child. Because sometimes, again, we forget that. So within this league, it's about not only looking after players on the field, but off the field as well. So just be mindful of when you come into this environment, because we have had it where people have come in and they've said, well, we want to fly off to tournaments. That's okay. All we're saying is this isn't the league for you if that's what you want to do. Okay? There is more than enough leagues out there if that's something you want to do continuously throughout a season. Go to tournaments 2, 3, 4 times a year or during the season. That's okay. This just isn't that league for that kind of person who wants to be involved in this kind of league. If that kind of sums it up, Jordan, Dave, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say just to add to that, Matt, and I think you covered it well. Sometimes we can fall into this trap that more is better. Better is better. And those are the questions to have. So it's not about volume, it's about quality. So you could do the same thing over and over and over again at huge volume and not have it help you get better if it's not intentional and it's not well presented and well structured. So I think that idea of better being better is a key conversation to have versus more being better.
I like the way that you frame that. I was going to frame it as that quality over quantity kind of piece, but I like the better is better rather than more is better. I'm going to steal that from you, Dave. And I think
I mix up what quality and quantity are all the time.
And I think that plays into just, there was a question here logistically in terms of the long pause between when the outdoor season ended for the 2007s previously, and why there was such a gap until the indoor developmental games would have started in January. And so the periodized breaks within the calendar each year are actually around your Christmas holidays. There's breaks in and around the summer, so when players are ending their school year and when they're going back to school. And long weekends also are not scheduled on as well to prioritize some of that being a kid, enjoying family time, and actually prioritizing the social development as well of the person, rather than just, here's another opportunity to attend a tournament. Here's another opportunity to get a camp in. Here's this, here's that. So it's around structuring it and having standards around that to put the player first and to develop them as best that we possibly can. So I hope I've answered that question and tied that in. There's questions in the chat about, is there tryouts to be a part of the program? This program is club run. So the clubs compete in the AYSL. So there are tryouts for all of the clubs. A list of the clubs are found on aysl.albertasoccer.com, which is in the chat there somewhere. And a full list of those clubs can be seen there. Dave, while I'm answering a couple of questions in the chat, I'll throw this one out to you. There's a question that's, can you provide some more color on what you mean by meaningful competition? By those two words, how do we prevent higher performing players that may be motivated by competitive play from losing that motivating edge, knowing that they will need to remain competitive if they intend to play at the highest level? I've got a piece on this, but I think you've got a really unique lens, so I'll toss that to you if you want.
Yeah, and there's another question just up above there that talks about kind of the other side of it. What if you're on the back end of that, where you're losing every week and you're losing motivation? And for me, the idea of meaningful competition and decoupling that from the adult competition model, I think, is the key here, because there will be in any environment, whether you look at the top levels in the world, player 1 to player 11 to player 20, there's a gap. When we look at the top leagues in the world, team 1 to team 20 in the relegation battle, there's a gap. And don't get me wrong, when I say the results don't drive what we're trying to do from a development perspective, don't take that to mean that I don't want us to be competitive. I'm one of the most competitive people out there. I was when I played, and I still am now when I play board games and kick around with my kids. So competition is important, and we need to learn how to compete. The reality is, though, kids don't need to be taught to compete, generally speaking. Generally speaking, kids know. When you go out on the playground and they play a game with no coaches, no adults around, they compete. And a lot of them compete harder in that environment than they do in other areas. So what I mean by meaningful competition is we want to create an environment where we don't have those one-sided games. So what that can mean, and it's something that we're still trying to work through. Remember, unfortunately, the AYSL, it's still in its infancy. We're at the end of season 0, and unfortunately, season 0 wasn't even a full season because of our COVID impacts. So what we want to get towards over time is an opportunity to be able to have more games with teams that are evenly matched. So if I know during the season I've got some teams at the top end of the league and some top teams at the bottom end of the league, does it make sense for those top teams to hammer on the bottom teams over and over again? Or are there things that we can do differently so that we can get good games for all of those groups on a regular basis? And I experienced this myself because my local environment here, we have a static roster, and we have a set schedule where you play everybody twice. And unfortunately, like in every league, there's some good teams and there's some not so good teams. And there are games where I know going in, we're in tough tonight, and I'll have done a good job, to keep it within 5. There are games where I think, okay, how am I going to challenge my kids when it gets to 10 What are we going to do so that we don't embarrass anybody? And that's not a good position to be in as a coach. And it's not good for the kids because they don't develop. So instead of trotting out those games over and over again, can we do something differently so that we make sure that there are good games every week, and that's how they be able to, and that's how they move forward, because we want to be able to challenge them appropriately. And when we say it's not about, who wins the most games, it's about the developmental experience along the way. It allows us to be able to do that. And yeah, we could have, a cup competition or a playoff or something like that if we need to say who is the team that's, going to be declared the champion. But when that's not the purpose, it gives us an opportunity maybe to do some different things so that we don't have those kids that are going out every week and getting thumped and losing motivation. And we make sure that those kids that are tracking in the other direction and maybe are on a stronger team are getting challenged so that they can move forward. So hopefully that was a good start for you, Jordan. I'll let you take it home from there.
I have nothing more to add, if I'm perfectly honest. I think you summed it up really nicely there, Dave. And I think it's about really making sure that what's being provided is the weekly training environment, and that's the key piece. And when the competition is oversold, clubs end up underselling their actual programming, and really that's where the quality happens. 80 to 85% of the time on the pitch. So that's what you're investing in, and that's what you're purchasing at the end of the day, right? So that's about all I would add there. Dave, there's a question here that I know that the standards will address. So I think this is one for you for sure. It says, mentioned a few times about how much time on the pitch the kids should be having. In your opinion, how many times a week, including games, would be most beneficial for them? So it's really not an opinion anymore because it's been standardized and laid out by CSA. So if you could share a little bit of that would be awesome.
Yeah, and these are, just to make sure I've got the age right, under 15s, correct? Or under 14s?
They would be mostly 15s, 14s, yeah.
14s and 15s, yeah. So I don't have the standards in front of me, so I'm going to go by memory and go, there's a maximum and a minimum. I think the minimum that we look for is 3 days a week, and the maximum that you could train and play would be 5 days a week, so that you do have those days off to be able to rest and recover. And then there's a maximum kind of volume of play. So I think the target, if I'm not mistaken, for the entire season, which includes preseason and a postseason if there is one, is 46 weeks. And we want to see the competitive environment be at least 30 weeks and average a game a week. So that information, it's not currently, because we're having some webmaster issues on the back end on our website, but that information will be on our website within the next week or so. And you'll be able to go through and find all of those standards. And it isn't something that's been publicly available in the past. And just from recent conversations that I've had with folks like Jordan and Matt saying, how come we can't just put this out so that everybody knows what it is? And it was never meant to be a secret. It was meant to be a tool to help those creating the leagues to be able to build out standards that matched. So we're putting it out there, and you can have a look in there and see what those kind of ranges are for all of those standards-based leagues. And
kind of following up within those standards, there's a question in the chat box around multi-sport athletes as well. And this probably seems like a lot. Like, holy smokes, we're going 3 times a week. There's a game a week. Like, the high volume or higher volume potentially of training, and higher quality of training. But what's the kind of recommendation for the clubs as well in terms of accommodating those multi-sport athletes and ensuring that we're not pigeonholing young people into becoming just footballers? They're actually able to pursue sport at whatever capacity that they choose.
Yeah, and we're starting to get to that age stage where the specialization starts to happen. So where it becomes really problematic is when we start to get into that space with kids, 12, 13 years of age, where they don't have an opportunity to be able to experience different sports and different environments and be a kid. As we get to this kind of 14, 15 age, now we're starting to have to do a little bit of that specialization, because you need to have that training volume if you're going to be able to get the repetitions and the experiences and see the pictures often enough to be able to solve the soccer problems that are presented to you. That said, there's always space for the multi-sport athlete. And I think that's a conversation to have if you're in that situation. I'm sure it's not all of you, but it's probably some that you should have with your club, because there may be some clubs that are more supportive of that environment. It'll be a situation where you can work together and figure out a training schedule that works. And I think that would be the other key piece to have, is just because it does fit doesn't mean that it should fit, if that makes sense. If I go to hockey at 6 o'clock and I can be off the ice and at soccer for a 9 o'clock practice, does that mean it's the right thing to do? Or is there a conversation to have? And those are the kind of things where you can have with your physical training provider who's there, who should have a good understanding of the loading. Because the last thing you want to do as parents is put your child in a position where they could be more susceptible to injuries, because they've created a situation where they're just doing too much, more than their body can sustain. So it's conversations to have. For me personally, I was a multi-sport athlete. I played every sport up until about the age that your kids are. And at that point, I realized that if I wanted to play soccer at a high level, I wasn't a good enough athlete to be able to do all of the other things. I needed to make that commitment. But certainly there were people that I played with and against that were a little more gifted than I was, that continued that multi-sport experience right through those high school years, and some even beyond that. So there's never kind of a hard and fast answer to say, yeah, you must or you mustn't. But it's a conversation to have with your club, because that's something that would need to fit within that periodized plan. But certainly the benefits of multi-sport participation, the research is hugely in favor of that as an important component, particularly for young ones. But if your child loves to play multiple sports, let's find a way. And the other part to that is, maybe it means, as Matt was saying, the AYSL today is maybe not the best environment for you. Maybe the tier 1 league might fit better because of the way the programs are structured. And then you can still play a high level other sport that demands the same kind of commitment. And maybe in a year's time, your child comes back to you and says, I really want to play soccer at that higher level, and I want to make that bigger commitment, and maybe I could take a step back in some of these other sports. But have that conversation with your child and see where they sit on it, and then make the best decision that you can in consultation with your clubs, so that they have an understanding of where you're coming from. Because I think the worst thing that can happen is you go into an environment where the club is saying, hey, it's 100% attendance, and you've got 4 other things on the go, and you're going to be putting your child in a spot where they're going activity to activity to activity. Because I think that's when you start to burn out, when they're over programmed and there isn't that opportunity to take a breath. And I lived that with my own kids, where my oldest, tonight was his night off. So he was super excited to be able to, jump on his computer and play some video games with his friends. Tomorrow he'll go to Taekwondo and he'll be really excited about that. Friday we'll do soccer, and that'll be great too. But remembering that there's always got to be that chance to be able to be a kid.
Couldn't agree more. There's a question here that this is not a program or league for teams to travel really to tournaments and engage in a heavy kind of tournament schedule or travel type schedule. Saying that, how do kids get scouted for universities, pro teams, etc. outside of their home province when they can't get in front of those coaches or programs that are at showcase tournaments or events? And so I think that this is a calendar and logistics kind of question, in terms of there are windows within the AYSL schedule for teams to be traveling to those kinds of showcase events. We know that this is a key component of a player's pathway, but there's also a recognition that the recruitment process is rapidly changing, and the days of college and university coaches coming and watching games and standing on sidelines is quickly going away, and it's being replaced by players recruiting themselves, by sitting down and clipping video and sending emails and making sure that they're getting in front of coaches first and foremost. And the ones who are successful, that do that legwork in terms of connecting with coaches and providing video and emailing them constantly, and then going to the showcase, oftentimes are going to be more successful in their recruitment journey than the ones who just turn up on the day at the showcase and hope that someone notices them. At the end of the day, we're all humans. We all have some level of bias. So if there's a recency bias that you can play against a university or college coach, that they then recognize you from all of the emails or the phone calls or the video that you've sent them, that's really the most effective way to get recruited. And I know that there's a lot of people that believe coaches come to players. It's rapidly changing that players are having to go to coaches. And university and college coaches are very, very busy, and they receive a high volume of emails with players looking to be recruited. So you have to have something that differentiates you a little bit. There has to be some persistence, and you have to put the work in if you're going to be recruited.
I'll just add to that quick, Jordan. I think you're spot on. And the other part that you should be aware of is that's another piece that your club should be providing supports to. So it's what we call it our player management processes, which are basically how do you move between programs and what's the club doing to help support you to be able to achieve the top level potential that you have. And I know there's a lot of clubs now that do, a lot of them call them college or university prep programs, where they teach kids about, this is the time if you want to go to the US, you need to be thinking about SATs in this age, and you need to have clearinghouse done by this timeline if you want to have that opportunity. So talk to the clubs about that as well. My child aspires to play NCAA soccer, or my child aspires to play U Sport soccer, and now that's becoming, especially on the boys' side, such an attractive proposition because of the affiliations with the CPL. So you're seeing U Sport players playing professional soccer in the summer against full-grown professional men, and I believe there will be opportunities that are similar at some point. Hopefully, it's something maybe that your children, if they're under 14s, under 15s now, may experience. But those opportunities that are there, so that's a conversation to have with your club as well. Is to say, what are you doing to help my child get ready? And like you said, Jordan, it's not to say you can't go to tournaments, but it's not meant to be a situation where you're seeking out a whole bunch of additional competition within the season. There's a few blocks where you say, okay, here's a spot where we can go and engage in that, because that's an important component of the experience for the child. So, but ask that question of your club. What does your management process look like, and how will you help my child to achieve their goal in the game, if that's professional soccer or outside of province? The beauty of the league for inside province, and not from Alberta, but I know there's some top quality post-secondary programs there. There's now 2 UWS franchises on the girls' side. There's a professional men's team, 2 professional men's teams that you can play for as well. So that pathway internally is really strong as well. And that is something that will be facilitated through the AYSL, because those organizations know there are players here. And it's in my backyard, so I can go and watch all of these players on a Saturday, and I can see them repeatedly over the season, versus having to maybe catch them in a tournament where they're playing shortened games on a Saturday, Sunday. Maybe I catch them on game 3 and they're exhausted and don't have their best performance. So I can see them week in and week out. I know the coaches. I can have a conversation and go, hey, what's so-and-so like in training? Because that's a key piece as well.
Exactly, and other levels for players as well. The CCAA and the ACAC as well are constantly looking for quality players, and often have very good academic scholarships as well to offer. The days of the full ride are quickly evaporating. You've got to have great grades to be getting recruited, and coaches, any coach at a university or college is going to tell you, and the kids, that if you don't have great grades, they can't get you in to begin with. And there's more academic money in terms of scholarship to be sent around rather than athletic money to be sent around. So key considerations there for that process as well. Dave, the questions are slowing down. Some of them are very logistical to the combine, so I'm just going to deal with that. We are not looking for certain qualities within players. That is a club-specific piece that the clubs are going to be evaluating players based on maybe a positional requirement, maybe a skill set that they need, maybe a personality type. They want to see players that are able to play and to showcase themselves to the best of their abilities. So that would be a piece that's club specific. But the biggest bit, and I see the questions just come in, like best advice to give to parents, and I'll leave this open to Matt and Dave probably as a parting note, that are involved this weekend might be a bit nervous, and the old try your best might be a little overdone, but really it's about being you. What makes your child special and different and unique, and how do they express that? And at the end of the day, if you walk out of there as a player saying, I gave it everything I had, I showed the clubs what I'm about, I got on the ball, I did what I could. When I wasn't on the ball, I did what I could. That's all you can ask. And at the end of the day, this is an evaluation of a snapshot in time, one moment in time. And the key piece is that if a club doesn't reach out and say, I'm really interested in such and such, it doesn't mean that the door's closed forever. I mean, if I stopped every single time that I was told no in my life, I wouldn't be here. That's for sure. You've got to kick down doors sometimes, and not just knock on them. So that would be my piece. And the other piece I would say for parents is just the John O'Sullivan adage of, I love watching you play. I thought your effort was tremendous today. I couldn't believe the way you tracked back that one time, instead of, I can't believe you missed that open net. I can't believe you let that player run past you. There's a difference in tone. There's a difference in message there that I think parents can take and support your child through this process.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely, Jordan. And I'll maybe talk, and I've talked a lot. I apologize, but I'll tell a little bit about my story, because I think it speaks to that point exactly. And ultimately, we're so lucky in Calgary that there are other environments. This is an environment. If this isn't the spot today, there's still a really strong tier 1 league where you'll get good coaching, you'll get good competition, you'll have a great experience. And maybe next year, this is the opportunity. And for me, being a parent now, I reflect on this stuff a lot more than I did when I was young. But I remember back in my playing days, going to these types of environments and being, shaking and nervous and scared, and not being one of the ones that was selected. And I remember the thing that my parents said to me after that really kind of kept me going, to go, hey, did you do your best? And okay, what do you want to do? And how can we help you? And if that's playing in the second tier, which it was for me, and then I had the disappointment of the second tier team folding, so that disappeared. And there was nothing at that young age. I can count the times, many a time, that I went to one of these things and wasn't the player that was selected. But for me, I had good supports around me, and I wanted it badly enough that I kept working. And ultimately, there was nothing at the age that your kids are. I've told this story before if anybody's been at my presentations, but when I was 14, we had similar type of environment to this, where I grew up in Ontario, where we had a regional team tryout, and I was there, and I wasn't good enough. And I went back and played on my city team and did pretty well there. Went back the next year and wasn't good enough again, and came back. So at that 15, 16, there was nothing in my athletic profile that would lead you to believe that I would have any future in the game. At 18, I was playing men's Division II soccer in my local community. I ended up playing, I was a 5-year starter in the CIS. I was a national champion and a player that played every minute that season, and was the captain of a team that was ranked number 1 in the country. And if you had looked at me at the age that your kids are, you would not have believed it. I was a squad player on a city team. And it's because I was a little bit of a later developer, and it took me a little while to gain that confidence. But if I didn't have that support from my parents saying, hey, keep at it, we got soccer tonight, let's go. And then that switch happened, and I was like, okay, I think I'm ready now to give this a go in a way that I need to commit to be able to reach that higher level of play. But I don't think if I didn't have good support from my family, it would have been easy for me to say, look, I'm just not good at this. I'm going to go find something else because these coaches keep telling me I'm not good at it by not picking me for these teams. So, so be there for your kids. And it's not a great environment to go into because it is stressful and they're still children. But it's one opportunity. It's not the only opportunity. There will be kids, I can guarantee you, that go to this combine and aren't selected, that end up being top class players when they're 17, 18 years old, that end up playing university soccer, college soccer, professional soccer, national team soccer. And it's the same thing I'd said with Vanessa Gio and Aleister Johnston. They were not selected for those teams at these ages, and look where they are now. So so be there for your kids and go and have fun and do, I mean, do your best is overused, but go and express yourself.
And Matt, if there's anything left for you,
I tell you what,
out of the room.
some great tidbits there of information, and again, some great questions coming in. I'll just talk to 2 or 3 very quickly. I know there's a few questions coming in about the format. Is it games? Is it this? Is it that? And I'm going to be very blunt with you. Who cares? Your child is going out to express themselves and do what they do, right? It's nice sometimes to have a format of this is what it's going to be. But guess what? We could plan that it's going to be dry and sunny. If it rains, we've got to deal with it. Something happens in life, we've got to deal with it. So again, sometimes I know we want to put that big blanket over kids and cradle them and do all of this. Get out there, do what you do. We respect you. We're going to support you. That's it. You know, Dave and Jordan have talked a lot there about if it doesn't go a certain way, and that's the reality. But let this be led by your child. And the reason I say that is you've probably realized my accent's a bit different from Dave's and Jordan's. But at 15, I signed with my first professional club in England. At 15. I didn't have a mum or dad to bring me to games, to do this, to do that. But because I wanted it, they said, if you want it badly enough, you'll make it work. So my journey going to training was 2 buses and a train, one way. Coming back was the same thing. So no one didn't have to force me to do something. I did it because I wanted to do it. I got to where I got to based on me with the additional support after me. So my main point with a lot of this is let it be driven from your children. If the drive is there now, great, support them with it. If it's not, that's okay, because as Jordan and Dave said, maybe next year it's there. But let them drive this, because otherwise it's you know, we're creating environments where kids are like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. If I'm going to do something, do it to the best of your ability and enjoy it. And what you know, adversity comes, we'll deal with it, because there's life skills kids get out of what they're going through now that they can take into 16, 17, 20, 21. And those are the things that this beautiful game creates. So as a parent, let your children drive. Sit down and say, how, and Dave mentioned it, how can we support you? Have those conversations with the clubs and really get into the details, because again, where in life would you make an investment without asking questions? Think about that, okay? So that would be my little 2 cents for today, because I get all this information you've had has been amazing. So that's it for me, Jordan.
Cheers, Matt, and valuable bits. To be fair, out of the 3 of us, Matt got the biggest response within the chat and the reactions. So
rightly so, well deserved.
You and I should have just been quiet. The one last question here: how much travel is going to be involved with the AYSL, and is it going to be just within Alberta or other provinces as well? It's just within Alberta. Right now, there are clubs based in Calgary. There are clubs based in Edmonton, in St. Albert, and in Sherwood Park. So the travel is very localized. The travel is only during the outdoor competitive season. There hasn't been, but there could be some sort of combined play within the indoor across a weekend. That hasn't been developed yet, but it's been discussed. The earliest that would come in would be potentially 2023. But you can expect some travel, and clubs do things differently. Some clubs will put the players on a bus and up they go. Some players ask the parents to drive. Some clubs go up the night before, stay in a hotel. So these are questions that you should be asking the clubs as well, in terms of how do you facilitate some of this travel? What's involved with that travel? You can expect a handful of games for sure in the opposite region. So if you're in the south, you're probably going up to the north a few times, depending on the age group and how the schedule's set up. If you're in the north, expect to come down to Calgary a few times as well. And there's certain facility standards as well built into the league, certain refereeing standards that are built into the league as well. So there's a guarantee there as well when you travel and where you're playing as well. So, okay, I think before we take up everyone's evening, that's 90 minutes. That's the typical length of a match. So if I could blow a whistle right now, I would, but my whistling's horrendous, so I won't. I'm going to take 2 seconds to say thank everyone for joining us tonight, because your investment in this and learning will pay massive dividends in your children and having the knowledge going forward to make great decisions. So thank you all for giving up some time and for being with us tonight. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Dave, as well, for giving up your time this evening as well to help us out and to help educate, the people and parents and families in Alberta around what this is and what it's not, and make sure that there's some clarity there for people to make great decisions. So thank you.